I told you we were going to talk about what has happened to the Freedom Caucus. There's a great piece that was written this weekend, and the title of this, The Vanishing of the Freedom Caucus, is written by Stephen Kent. And he talks about what happened with the departure recently of Justin Amash. I know there's a lot of controversy about Justin Amash because he has called on the Congress to consider the possibility of impeachment. Now, we can have a debate and discussion about that particular subject. But it is interesting that he finds himself on the outs with a group that he helped to found. What is going on here? To provide some perspective on this, we have the person who has written this piece, who we're having on the broadcast for the very first time, political commentator based out of Raleigh and spokesperson for Young Voices. I'm referring to Stephen Kent. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Good morning, Vince. It's been a long time. It's nice to speak with you.
Yes, great to speak with you as well. Let's start off, first off, and talk about the Freedom Caucus. What's the whole purpose for this organization? Why was it founded?
Well, the Freedom Caucus is pretty clear in what their founding purpose is. They say that they give voice to countless Americans who feel that Washington does not represent them. They support open, accountable, and limited government, the Constitution, the rule of law, and policies that promote the liberty, safety, and prosperity of all Americans. So there's a lot there. It's all kind of jargon and kind of wrapped up in a mission statement. But if you were to ask me what that all means, that is a caucus that is dedicated to sort of gumming up the works of Washington, D.C., slowing down compromise between both parties in D.C., which really works to restrain the size and scope of government. And there's also something that is woven in there that would suggest that they exist to sort of curtail excesses by the executive branch, no matter who you would think is in the White House.
So what has happened to the Freedom Caucus? Because we've seen a change. Now, you talk about some of the history. They played a significant role in getting rid of John Boehner, thank goodness. And there was a level of accountability they were trying to provide to the Republican Party and challenging Paul Ryan and some of his very deceitful tactics as well. So what has happened now to the Freedom Caucus? Where are they making their mark?
Well, I guess just to be blunt, what has happened to the Freedom Caucus is the same thing that has happened to the Republican Party, which is the rise of Donald Trump and sort of really changing the understanding of what the conservative consensus is in Washington. Donald Trump did not run as a conservative. He ran as Donald Trump, which is absolutely something else. And what you've had in the Freedom Caucus is an alliance between libertarian and conservative politicians who sort of have been able to unite around a small government agenda and opposing someone like Barack Obama and his ally, John Boehner. And this alliance between libertarians and conservatives to sort of curtail government goes back to the 1980s with a very clear opponent in that of communism. This sort of brought these two sides, which really in reality don't have a great deal in common besides suspicion of the left. And what you've had in Donald Trump is sort of a smashing of this single reason to be allied, because Donald Trump is himself a big government guy. He wants an activist government for a certain set of policies. And this libertarian and conservative alliance is rapidly falling apart. Justin Amash leaving is sort of the latest chapter in that story.
One of the things that you mentioned here in going back in history, I want to mention some of these names because they're very significant. Founding members, Mark Meadows, Mick Mulvaney, who is now the acting chief of staff, Jim Jordan, Ron DeSantis, and Justin Amash. And I had a conversation with someone recently about this because all of the things you talked about, smaller government, financial accountability, do you hear these conversations at all anywhere, Stephen Kent?
Well, I don't hear these conversations being had. I still see a lot of lip service being paid to those given things. But, you know, when the Freedom Caucus ends up supporting a military spending bill that ended up passing during the government shutdown or after the government shutdown of 2017 into 2018, they just sort of mask this as business as usual in D.C. Mick Mulvaney himself wrote in 2015 in the Wall Street Journal that we have to absolutely rethink the way that we do military spending. He was one of the chief enemies of then Senator John McCain. And like you mentioned, like Mick Mulvaney now sitting in the White House as the chief of staff of Donald Trump and saying that spending and new deficits is just a necessity of government is evidence that these people, once they get into Washington, and they get not just into Washington, but serious power, they become different people because they are interested in survival. And the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump has the ability to snuff out opposition like no other president, particularly a Republican president, has before. You saw this happen with Mark Sanford of South Carolina. May his career rest in peace. This is just what happens when you go against the president. He works to demolish you. And there are very few politicians left in the Freedom Caucus who are willing to endure that kind of harassment. And the Freedom Caucus, just, in the past 2 years, there was a moment where they were considered an enemy of the administration. But they've decided to reverse course and be part of his coalition.
We only have less than a minute left. So the freedom movement, where does it stand? Where is it?
It's deeply confused, and I think it doesn't really know what it is fighting anymore besides fighting against this nebulous idea of the left. And frankly, that's just not enough. The cultural vision between Republicans and Democrats may be very, very different. But at the end of the day, governing parties in Washington, D.C. are committed to the expansion of government for whoever their voters are. The Freedom Caucus and their decline really signifies a descent in the ability of a single body in Congress to check the ability of government to grow. And it's deeply unfortunate. And I wish Justin Amash all the best. I'm not sure if he has a career much longer in Washington.
Right.
DC.
Hold on. Let's consider carrying this through the break. Hold on.
This is the Vince Coakley radio program.
Back on the Vince Coakley radio program, we're talking with Stephen Kent, who is discussing what's happened to the Freedom Caucus. Stephen is a political commentator based out of Raleigh, spokesperson for Young Voices. And one of the things I commonly hear, and this is the message I constantly hear from people, Stephen, is we've got to come together to fight the left. And you used that phrase a little bit earlier, kind of as a reference, and you used the word nebulous to describe this. Why is that nebulous?
Well, I don't think that the left in general is a appropriate way to sort of unify in fighting in Washington, D.C. The left is sort of one set of ideas, but the ideas that we have always been committed to in the freedom movement and the liberty movement has been the size and excesses of government. And when you sort of get that tribalistic and you say, okay, well, I'm going to only fight one shade of big government, then you're just going to turn a blind eye quite naturally to the excesses of the other kind. And listen, socialism, AOC, these things are scary. I do not like what is coming out of the Democratic Party these days. But that does not mean that you can just sort of write a blank check to the Republican Party and their politicians sort of in response to that, even as bad as the Democrats can get.
And I think this is something that very often gets lost in this discussion, is there's such you used a word that I use very often, which is tribalism. We've got this tribalism that is set in, and we're just basically defending sides. And I wonder whether we're defending sides ultimately of the same coin.
Yeah, I think that tends to be the case. And, going back to Justin Amash and his departure from the Freedom Caucus, this is a guy who had 100% from the Club for Growth and a 99% lifetime score, that his one big offense in which they discussed voting to condemn him was saying that, this executive might be impeachable and perhaps we should pursue that. And that's not just tied to the Russia investigation and all the stuff going on around Mueller. Just, obvious signs of corruption with this president, whether it be with that obstruction, or it be with his practices at Mar-a-Lago and doubling the cost of admission to this club so you can spend time around him and curry favor and influence. This is something that conservatives, libertarians, small government people should be deeply alarmed by. And just in general, our Congress has to be constantly coveting power from the executive and finding ways to try to curtail them and rein them in. It is no secret that every president has grown the strength of the White House. And frankly, every member of the Freedom Caucus should be narrowly focused on just that mission, causing trouble for the White House so that Congress can get its power back.
You know, that's one of the interesting things that you're not privy to this, but I've had a conversation with someone some time ago where I basically said that we've reached a point. I had a conversation with someone who was suggesting that this country, by the way we're going, we had the Barack Obama people who just praised and worshiped Barack Obama. Now it's the era of Trump. And I had a person who actually said to me, I think this country is more fitting for a monarchy by the way people are going and what we're turning the presidency into. And I've come to the place, I feel like I owe this person an apology because I kind of laughed at that person. Mm-hmm. Is this not what we're doing to the executive branch? We are continuing to elevate it beyond its intended purpose.
Everybody, I say this often, and Vince, I think it's true what your friend said, is I think that at our core, human beings are naturally predisposed to king worship, to following single strong leaders. That is why monarchy is the natural and has been the long-standing state of human government up until the founding of this country, which really took off something entirely new. Democracy is not our natural state. I just saw the other day, Candace Owens, the Fox News commentator and conservative pundit, was saying that, there's no question that people should be stripped of their citizenship for flag burning, right? I mean, this is just bizarre stuff coming from the right wing these days. And it just very much reeks of monarchy. Kamala Harris has made similar proposals when it comes to immigration, completely overhauling the system with the power of the pen in the White House and giving a mandate to Congress that they would have 60 days to do something on guns or she would do it herself. Everybody's looking for a king, and it's nice to feel like you're winning in these battles between the right and the left. But listen, it's just not a fair trade, and it's not something that we should consider.
Pretty strong words there, and I think some cautionary words for us as we move forward looking at the big picture. Stephen Kent, enjoyed talking with you. Look forward to having you back again sometime.
Thanks, Vince.